Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the third and final episode of Olympics Group Talk, where today we're taking a closer look at Group A. Olympics Group Talk is a short and special series ahead of the Olympics where I'm previewing all 12 teams that are participating across 3 episodes. Each episode highlights a group, and each group contains 4 nations. Now, to make it a little bit more special, because the Olympics is just that, I'm joined by a special guest, a journalist, to really dissect and take a deeper dive into one of the teams in the group as I then preview the 3 remaining teams. Make sure to check out the 2 previous episodes where I dissect Group B and C, taking closer looks at Australia and Japan with their respective groups. To end things off with Group A, I'm going to be joined by a very, very special guest to talk a little bit more about the reigning Olympic champions, Canada. You've seen her on the pod a few times before. It is none other than the very special Shireen Ahmed. Shireen is a CBC senior contributor and will also be part of CBC's commentary and broadcast team for this Olympics. She's a multi-platform sports journalist, a TEDx speaker, a mentor, and award-winning sports activist who has focused a lot of her work on the intersectionality of racism and misogyny in sports. Her work has been featured on The Guardian, Sports Illustrated, ESPN, TSN. I mean, basically everything that has ever contributed to women's sports, you will find Shireen there. So, without further ado, let's get talking about Canada, the Olympic reigning champions, with Shireen. All right, everybody, I have Shireen here with me, who actually got her first cap on the channel by joining me last year for World Cup Group Talk. So now we're making it 3 caps for Olympics Group Talk. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, thanks. How are you? I'm pumped for the Olympics, so excited.
I'm just as excited in talking about Canada, the reigning Olympic champions. I knew I had to bring in a big knowledge person. So who better person to do it than you? I think we need to jump straight into the roster because this roster did have a little bit of a shock surprise element, definitely a spicy discourse around it, as usually one would expect with the Olympics because it's kind of a tight one, 18 players, but it did feel particularly that this Canada roster had some talk happening around it. What were your initial thoughts when you saw some of the omissions, some of the names that didn't even make it on the alternate list, the first time Olympians, some really great names? You've got the youngsters of Simi Wuju, Jade Rose, but also Chloe Lacasse, which it's crazy to think that this is the first Olympics she's going to because she's been such a big part of Canada in the last 2 years. But yeah, what are your initial reactions of the roster now having a few days that you thought about it?
So when I first saw the roster, I'll admit I was really shocked that Olivia Smith wasn't on it. For me, I mean, I remember being in the office and Andy Petrillo and I were just scribbling names. And we were marveling at how difficult it is to take 18 players when, World Cup squads are 23. They do have 4 alternates, but it's not a lot of people. And of course, it's not a bad problem to have, particularly for Canada, where there's been trouble in developing the development system, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I was just surprised Smith wasn't on it. But then after being on the media call with Bev and hearing her and understanding and processing, I mean, the end of the day, and she said this and I tweeted it out and I thought it was really important. She's trying to pick the best squad, not the best players, individual players necessarily. And that's the job of, head coach. That's the job of the manager, is to make sure that the players that they get really encompass and are able to understand and roll out the system of play. And I wasn't surprised personally not to see Desi Scott. I love Desi. She is adored by the entire country. She's a medalist, has done a lot for the country, but at the same time, in terms of being able to adapt and, coming off of injury, and the amount of recovery and the time of recovery, Canada's games are the 25th, the 28th, and 31st. That is a very intense schedule. And also have 2 matches ahead of that before the Olympics begin. The Australia on the July 13th, and then Nigeria, you just informed me and the world, on the 17th. So that's pretty quick. There's a lot there. So recovery time matters and her having the data and the information and being able to make those decisions. I was thrilled to see Chloe Lacasse on there. I think she's absolutely necessary. I was not surprised to see Jade Rose. She's fit. She's been fit for a while. She's a captain of the Harvard team. Like, I mean, come on. There's no surprises for me there. I'm not worried at all about Canada's backline. That's just not something that I'm concerned about. No surprises. I mean, we knew somebody had to like not be on the 18, and that person was Shalina Zadorsky. So Jade Riviere, you've got Gilles, who is the brick wall, you've got Kadisha, who is basically in charge back there, and then you've got Jade Rose. So we know that is pretty that for me, there was no surprises. Where Canada sort of needs some work and there's questions about injury and coming off injury. I was surprised to see Quinn on there. I know that they had won player of the match last week, but that's one. And I wasn't 100% sure what the specific condition was and hadn't had updates about Quinn and their playing.
Mhm.
They are a really smart playmaker. Like the IQ from Quinn, game IQ is really strong. But this is going to be a very intense tournament. And, Jesse Flemmy's in the middle. We know these things. There's no surprises for me. Too many. I know that we know that Adriana Leon up front is hot right now. There's the obvious Janine Becky, who's, sort of like the emotional, like thinking, in some ways, the moral compass of the team and really articulate and an advocate. So for
Mhm.
me, very much that. I like seeing Becky on this team for a variety of reasons. Um, Evelyn Viens was for me because it was going to come down to Carla Viens, right? Like
Yep.
that's kind of what it was. And I know there's Gabby Carl fans out there that are literally like furious about this, but at the same time, again, deferring back to what Bev Priestman said, and we have to defer to Bev Priestman. She's, she has access to all this information that we might not have. In the media call that you were on, she talked about fitness. She talked about adapting. She talked about the system and those who are best suited for that for this tournament. This isn't like the same 18 she did take to the World Cup. It's a different roster, but that
Very.
means
Hmm.
she's doing her job, right?
Mm.
Um, I think there was a bit for me, a little bit of a surprise with Michelle Prince
Yeah.
because again, we can talk about this injury. So, but hopefully, uh, you know what I mean?
They're fit and
Yeah.
I think like Beth said, they're going to be ready by the time these games roll in, which is information that we don't have. We don't know how far these players are in their recovery. It's pretty clear that the Canadian team, the staff of the medical staff is working very closely with both of the players' clubs of, Sydney Collins and North Carolina Courage, very similar with Prince in Kansas City. But you've highlighted Bev, and actually, I think despite all the criticism around this roster, I think she took very tough decisions, which in some ways was something that was missing from the World Cup roster. So in some ways, you saw Beth Friesman take steps of correcting some of the things that didn't go her way at the World Cup. And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about her change of the system, the way she did it at the bounce of the World Cup. It was a shattering 4-0 defeat to Australia that really nailed just sent them back home in a devastating fashion. And on the back of it, they had to qualify for the Olympics. So it wasn't like they had a few friendlies to bounce back. Yet we got to see a new system, a system that the team has been thriving. Can you talk to me a little bit about that form following the World Cup, kind of that bravery of the team and just the new names that have emerged and I think shined in the system, like Sydney Collins?
Yeah, as far as the 4-0 loss was rough. I was there. It was Canada looked really lost. There was no system. There was no nothing. And I mean, I spoke and I wrote an article probably about a month ago. No, less than that. What is time even? Ahead of the send-off match with Mexico, and I had some time with Bev and interviewed her. Me and Signa Butler from CBC Sports went, and she was really open and ended up writing an article because she said some really profound things. And she talked about Australia, and she says, I just tried to keep people happy. She had a team of players that there was a lot of pressure and a lot of noise from the outside. And Bev's also a great person and saw that some of the players were, might have been being felt pulled or distracted. And she said verbatim, I tried to keep them happy, and that might have cost her. or
Hmm.
she had to balance and navigate through what was a very difficult time. And, there's all this stuff with the Federation, all this drama happening. They almost went on, labor action, a strike before she leaves. So it was like there was so much, and she had to put this team together. And that was tough. So her talking about that. So those are some of the things that she talked about. She was really vulnerable and she was really honest, which is something that I really appreciate from her, because she's Bev, when you talk to Bev, is who Bev is. That there's no like drama, there's no shielding, there's no politics. Like she's not that person. And this is who she is. She loves the team. She cares about the program. She loves the country. She loves football. Like that's it. You know what I mean? I have this little anecdote that I'll share. When we were in Australia and Canada was eliminated, we were all pretty shocked. Like nobody was anticipating going home like that soon. And a bunch of the Canadian journalists and Steph Young of The Athletic, who is an honorary Canadian, quite honestly, we all went out. We were all in Melbourne and we all went out for dinner. And just ironically, Bev and the coaching staff, Canada Soccer picked the same restaurant at the table next to us as
Oh,
we're having
wow.
like our. So it was a little bit of, oh, okay, hey. So they came in after us and saw us sitting there, and then kind of had the server move them, set them up, which was totally fair because like
Hmm.
that's a little too close.
Yeah.
But Bev came over, shook everyone's hand, thanked us for covering and thanked us for being there, and was incredible. Just very brave and accountable, and never hid, never like just was outstanding. And that really that really struck me, and it stayed with me. Now that being said, I agree with you completely. I think she's making very bold choices, and she talks a lot about bravery, and I've also written about this. I have a lot of Bev Priestman think pieces, to be honest, and she talks about bravery, and she's doing that. And she's really focused. Bev Priestman knows what she wants to do. And, she said on that call, like everybody on this call would have picked a different
Yeah.
18.
I think the word accountability in Beth Friesman you mentioned earlier is pretty much we've seen that consistently in every presser before games, after games, and like specifically that Mexico doubleheader that they had as a send-off series. Like I asked Beth Friesman in that room of what are you most proud of in this run? And she said, we got our core values again, which are some things that we did lose at the World Cup. And I think that reassures fans and hopefully reinstills some trust in them. The last question I want to ask about the roster is who do you think is a player to watch? Who do you feel like will have a great, not necessarily breakout tournament, um, but a player that opponents will have to think twice when she has the ball on them or when they have the ball on them?
I have a couple.
All right, let's hear 'em.
Um, I'm excited to watch Chloe Lacasse. She's electric. She's fun for me. Um, she goes down the line like I'm like what where like it's like a tornado. Like she's electric. I have fun watching Vanessa Gilles because she's so emotional. Just so emotional. And I love all of it. Like she's just a typical defender. You know what I mean? I also am really excited to watch Jade Rose. I mean, this is her first mega tournament, and she'll perform, and she does. And she's been already called the future of Canada's backline. So excited to see that. I'm also I'm also excited to see Sydney Collins. I'm excited to see what she does. Bev also mentioned that injuries and the progress and recovery of those injuries also had an impact on the roster selection. So Sydney Collins' injury was a break through the bone. It wasn't a muscular injury or a tendon injury or a ligament injury. So it's cleaner and healing. And we know this, right? Physiologically, we know
Yeah.
this. We have world-class players. We've got Ashley Lawrence, who can pretty much do anything. For me, Ashley is the most versatile player on the team.
Put
Um,
her in goal. She can probably do a pretty good job
I
there.
was about to say if we could make her striker. I mean, I'm sure when she played striker, she's so smart that it's like offensive. You know what I mean? Like I love watching her play. I also think she's absolutely a stellar human being. I love Ashley Lawrence so much. But that being said, we're getting competitors who have such an exquisitely developed attacking system, whether
Mhm.
it's Spain, who are ruthless. Colombia, they've got stars from, La Liga Femenina. They've got NWSL stars. Myra Ramirez is at Chelsea, European exposure, like styles of play they understand. Colombia is often underestimated. And I know that people say that Canada's people, I'm sorry, like I'm like, oh, Colombia, they're
Yeah.
scary. And I think they've also suffered with inequality in their own federation and lack of funding. But what they've been able to produce, and now with the globalization of women's football and attention, their players are coming and they're coming. They've got some young players. Their team, I wouldn't say is super, super young. They have, like, I wouldn't say that. Um, but they're not like super old either. I just think, there's a lot of people mid to late 20s, which is
Hmm.
amazing. But they also have younger players too. Baron is young
Hmm.
and is, like I think that there's all that. So we'll see. So for me, the one to watch for Canada, for me, the surprise element will be Colombia.
I like that
France,
show.
we've played France so often, and even the players that I spoke to and I asked them who you're most looking forward to playing, they're like France. Like so many of them, even Adriana Leon said France because they're going to be at home. It's going to be a home crowd. They're going to have to drown out the noise, this and
Hmm.
that. In Saint Etienne, they're going to have to do
Yeah.
that. But we know Wendy Renard. Like I mean, like Khadijah Buchanan played with her at Lyon. Like they know each other. They know how Renard plays. They know there's a set piece. She goes to the box. You got to cover her three man. Goal side. We all know. I know this. Not that I can execute it, but I know what the plan is. We
Yeah.
know she goes. She uses her height. How are they going to defend against that? This and that and the other thing.
I think highlighting Canada's midfield is for me where they will have the biggest challenge. They'll have to figure out speed. I don't think Canada is necessarily speedy in the middle. I think
Mm,
the partnerships are still in question. It's almost like Beth Friesman has nailed down Simi Awuju and Jesse
mm.
Fleming, but that can't be played every single game for possibly 120 minutes when the knockout rounds roll around. So I think I'm very excited to see how the fullbacks and the wingback options work together. I think that's where the system thrives. The prospects of Jade Rose playing behind a Chloe Lacasse who has got Leon running ahead of her is terrifying. If I was in opposition defending that, you'd really have to be prepping and you'd have to be ready for the engines that you've got. You've talked a little bit about the group. In some ways, it's an easier kind of group. Colombia is not a familiar face. To me, I would second the fact that that will be their toughest option because they haven't seen that similar kind of play. They are going to play Nigeria in pre-camp. Perhaps that will prep them for a little bit of the physicality and the fast counterattacks that they both can go on. But what does Canada need to possibly podium again? They're going in as the reigning champions. This is not something that the team has gone in with because usually they're always the underdogs. It's almost like a chip on their shoulder, but at the same time, Beth Priestman in that Mexico presser, she said, nobody's expecting us to win. And I love that. She said, we're flying under the radar, and I want it that way. How do you assess kind of that mentality of let everybody talk about Spain and Germany and Brazil and we'll cook from behind?
Yeah, no, the cooking from behind is important, but to say that no one's paying attention, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Canada's paying attention. I mean, there's a lot of stress here, like people are talking about it, right? Um, but that works. Like if they're not going to be a center of attention, there'll be some discussion about,
Sure.
what the new iteration of this team is, Son Christine Sinclair since her retirement, what this looks like and how it moves forward. But that also excites me. I think I agree with you about Colombia completely. For me, they're the ones that are, and I know that they're being studied, and the way that they interact and the way that they attack and that they defend is something to really study. And that's the really interesting part here. That's why I love tournaments like the Olympics because they're a smaller tournament as opposed to the World Cup, but they're going to test them from every type of culture of football in the world. So we'll see South American football, we'll see European football, and then we'll see Oceanic football, like New Zealand. We haven't mentioned New Zealand yet.
Mhm.
For me, New Zealand is, and I don't want to be overconfident about this, but the last time, like it wasn't something that I think Canada needs to struggle with in the same way. I think the study and the preparation obviously is necessary, but they're
Mhm.
not as big of a threat, let's just say, as Colombia would be, and I think that's a fair thing
That's
to
a fair.
say.
Mhm.
Yeah. So Canada will, probably do that. I think it's a good I'm not mad that New Zealand is their first match. Like Bev Priestman said, if they fly a little under the radar or they're not front and center, it's not a bad problem to have. I mean, they're Olympic champions, but more recently, Spain won the Women's World Cup. So they're kind of going to be the center of attention and there's discussion. I mean, I still find it wild, like Sweden's not going or England's not there. Like I find this wild. Um, I like
Yeah.
truly
Yeah.
like World Cup runners up are not attending and the silver medalists from last time. Like I just and like what is the Olympics without
Yeah.
Stina? Like what
But I think that's the beauty of the Olympics. You're getting to see teams like Colombia. This is their debut in the Olympics. We're going to get to see Zambia. I'm very, very excited to see how they do in a competition like this and in a smaller roster. You're going to be covering a lot of this tournament. You're going to be talking a lot about the things that are surrounding the game and the context that it comes in with. How do you hope this Olympics happening in Paris, in France, not I don't want to I'm not sure if using the word change is the right thing, but how do you hope it impacts women's football and women's sports moving forward, or perhaps when this tournament concludes?
what I wanted to do, I think I wanted to showcase, like I wanted to showcase we know how good Japan is and we know how good, you know, Nadeshiko is and the program is, but I really still will never get enough of seeing it. We don't see enough of Japanese football on the side of the world. Um, and like Colombia and Zambia, and particularly given the federation issues that Zambia has had, including, suspension of coach and then with allegations of maltreatment and sexual abuse of players. Like these are things that all still exist in the women's sports space. And sometimes it's nice to watch a match and think of tactical and think technical and forget about it. But then at the end of the day, that's my job is to pay attention to the outlying factors and to everything happening in France, like to think about the women in France that can't play football because they wear hijab in the place that's celebrating sport and celebrating, women's sport in particular. And this is the Olympics of gender parity. And you have a whole swath of people from the host country that can't participate in sport. Like it's not mathing. You know what I mean? It's not girl mathing or any mathing, as a matter of fact. So I think about these things. I think about the implication of the sport in general and what it means going forward. Um, I am excited for the matches at the same time. I love the amp up. I'm really excited to be covering these Olympics from home. I'm not going to Paris, and I'm really excited that I'm not going to Paris for some of the reasons I mentioned. And to be able to what I do welcome people to do is when they watch it, also definitely pay attention to the podium and the medaling, but also pay attention to the circumstances around. My friend Dr. Jules Boykoff has said this has been the most politically charged Olympic Games in decades, and I think we should pay attention to that because the stories are the athletes, they're of the environment, there are so many things, and there's so many things that are really important um, that we should pay attention to. Obviously, because I talked to Bev about this as well. I hope that all the athletes and all the venues and the people and the volunteers and the fans, the community stay safe. That's really important as a part of this, but that's something else that I'm going to pay attention to and stay safe within the sport. There's ways in which FIFA just launched about, I think it was a month ago or 3 weeks ago, about their measures and implementations for trying to better safety of women in the game. And these are things that I think about on the regular, like what can we do individually and collectively
Mhm.
to create a safer space? And some people don't like to hear that women's sport and women's football in particular is not necessarily always safe. And we love it, we celebrate it, but if we don't talk about those things too, then we're doing a disservice to the players in the game itself.
I don't even know what to say after that because you're right on all of it. There is so much happening around the football. There is so much happening around the athletes. It's more than just the 90 minutes or 120 minutes of the ball being kicked around. Like you mentioned, this is very politically fueled. There's a lot happening. The fact that this is in France, in a place where athletes who look like you or me can't play. And there's been, an abundance of players who have had to leave France, have had to leave the French league, have had to completely stop sports because they can't play sports there. Shireen, I've already mentioned what you're going to be up to this Olympics, which is a lot. You're going to be very busy, I assume. Hopefully, Canada go all the way too, because that means you're going to be even busier keeping up with them. Where can folks continue to read, continue to listen, and just stay up to date with everything that you'll be up to?
Um, I will be at CBC Sports, CBC Olympics, doing not just coverage of this, but a series of other things. I'm excited to dive in to that. It'll be wonderful. It's not my first Olympics, but my first Olympics, meaning that wasn't in a remote situation. So being able to cover and do features and do interviews and that kind of stuff is something I'm really looking forward to. So that's at CBC Sports. You'll find me. You'll find my face on social media.
Fun. It'll be dramatic, chaotic, as always. The Olympics delivers all of that. I'll leave all the stuff that Shireen just mentioned, her Twitter, X, where you can find her on CBC, because if you're not reading on everything that Shireen's going to be writing, you're probably missing out. So I'm going to keep you in the loop, everything down below. Shireen, thanks so much for joining me today. And I'm very much looking forward to hopefully see Canada on the podium.
Definitely, me too.
So that was all things Shireen and Canada for you. Obviously, that was recorded before we were made aware of the roster changes between Sydney Collins and Gabby Carl, who both of the players were talking points in my chat with Shireen. Unfortunately, Sydney Collins has suffered another ankle injury, so she has been removed from the Olympic squad. Gabby Carl takes in her spot, and because this injury and this replacement is happening before the Olympics kicked off, Canada is able to call somebody else to the alternate list, which happens to be Desiree Scott. So, three-time Olympian making it into the alternate list. Really great experience and a backup player. So, you got to be thrilled for Gabby Carl, but also very, very disappointed the horrendous luck that Sydney Collins has had to face over the last few months, really. Regardless, the opponents do not change for Canada, that being France, Colombia, and New Zealand. So let's talk a little bit more about the hosts, France, possibly getting to podium here on home soil. So France obviously qualified as hosts. They actually missed out on the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. This is only their third qualification for the Olympics, and so this is not a competition that they've regularly been featured in. In 2012, which was their first feature in the Olympics, they lost the bronze medal match to Canada and then got knocked out by the Canadians in the quarterfinals 4 years later in Rio. So Canada and France do certainly love to meet each other in the Olympics, and history does tell us that Canada often goes on to beat France, especially, its knockout stages. So it's definitely going to be a fantastic matchup that they're going to go ahead with the champions in the group stages. Every single match that they'll be playing, they'll have the home support. I think the international games that France has had at home has shown really, really great turnout numbers. The tickets certainly look great for the Olympics, and so I won't be surprised to see if every single France game will be a sold-out game, which means, it's going to be fantastic atmospheres that the French will be able to bring. Looking at the called up squad, I think the main talking point and really the only big surprise that could come out of this squad is the fact that Yves Perisset is listed as a reserve and on the alternate list rather than the 18. Really the only defender, and I'm not sure if they're even positioned for position switch from what we've seen, would be Melia Ricard of Real Madrid, who has made the 18-player squad. However, Renard, the head coach, spoke that this was more of a tactical decision. Yves Perisset doesn't necessarily give him the versatility that he's looking for, which is quite an interesting statement because I think we have seen Yves Perisset in a wide variety of positions with Chelsea, and I think she's always been a player who has inserted energy and creativity, and I think her crosses into the box with France and with Chelsea have always been one that opposition is looking out for. So I'm not sure I see how Yves Perisset is indeed excluded from the squad, but apparently it's a bit of a tactical decision. But really, other than that, no major talking points from the squad. Katoto is back after missing the World Cup from an ACL, and she's one hell of a player to keep an eye out on, obviously. And I think the issue with France is that they're either really hot or really cold. Either they're a team that's clicking in the midfield, Kenza Dolly and Taletti are having one hell of a game. Sandy Baltimore is putting in the creative, outlets to her forwards, and Katoto is there finishing and doing what she does best. Or sometimes you're getting a completely disorganized, almost disoriented, unmotivated France that just looks so flat and looks outplayed in every game when they've looked kind of cold. And their track record with Hervé Renard and previously is that they've not done well on the big stage, and they've also not done very well against the biggest opposition. Granted, they have beaten Sweden twice in their Euros qualifiers. They've also beaten England once and lost England once, but they've also at the same time lost to the Republic of Ireland in a qualifier right before the Olympics is kicking off, and also got, completely outplayed in the Nations League final against Spain. And so what France has really struggled to showcase is consistency. Injuries have been kind of in and out of the squad, but nothing really major to have shown this level of inconsistency of a really, really talented squad on paper and on the pitch. Often some of the substitutes come in a little bit too late, or maybe they're not the right substitutes, and they continue to look flat the entire game, which for me is another issue, is that when they are looking flat and when France does have one of those cold games, it's not like they have an ability to change and switch gears, in the 70th, 60th, even 80th minute, which is a bit of a worry of why can't they switch into the second gear. And so if France is hot and they're clicking and they look as solid as can be in the back, their midfield is fluid, super quick, and their finishers up top, am I really going to sit here and talk about how good Katoto is? Like, sometimes people forget how good and two-footed she is because she's been out for a few, almost 2 years because of her ACL, but she is one of the best finishers in the game, which kind of for me begs two questions. Is France able to get over this hurdle of not crumbling under pressure on the big stage against the big opposition, and how well can they hit their consistency in a schedule that's very tough and kind of hard to manage and you're having to rotate? How are you going to be able to get this consistency across? France is going to get out of the group, and I think if you look at the brackets, they also have a pretty good chance, I think, with the opposition that they may get, to even go past the quarterfinals. And they may not even go past the quarterfinals, which is also the beauty of the Olympics because the opposition is all really good. But is France going to be able to step into another gear because they're at home, because they're on home soil? And if they're really able to lock in consistency and they're able to lock in being able to, switch into another gear when the game asks you to it, they certainly can go on podium. And again, like I mentioned, there's no better stage to do that than at home. They've never podiumed at the World Cup. They've never podiumed at the Olympics. France has never won a major trophy, which is crazy to say. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how France does. They're going to be at home. I'm personally looking forward to see how they do against Canada. It's a team that they have not had the best time against at the Olympics. Who's going to be a very exciting team to watch this Olympics is Colombia, making their debut into this Olympics. I'm so thrilled that Colombia has made it because, they're such a fun and exciting team, and I think they captured a lot of hearts and fans at the World Cup for many great reasons, and absolutely they deserve to capture all these great new fans. They have shed such a good light on South American football, and I think it's going to be really exciting to see how they continue to build for the 2027 Brazil World Cup. Now, a few things have changed since last summer and the World Cup. Their current head coach was the assistant head coach, and they're currently dealing with a fair amount of injuries. This includes the loss of Dana Ospina, Lorena Bedoya. Both of these players were super important and integral to Colombia's midfield. Fullback Ana Maria Guzman of Bayern Munich, super important player for them off the bench, comes in with such excitement, is really, really fast, hard for the opposition to defend, also out. And so all these injuries have made the alternate list look different and the final 18 look different, and I think this begs the question of how will they rotate. And when they've had everybody fit and healthy, they've looked really great, and we've almost seen like the best starting 11 of Colombia and what they want to produce. But at the same time, there's really big injuries that are surrounding the squad, and how will they be able to deal with that? The back four particularly isn't so much changed, neither is the up front. Obviously, Linda Caicedo, Mayra Ramirez are names that you're going to see up there, but for me, the question marks is going to be that midfield, which they're losing the majority of their players in. They haven't necessarily settled on the three midfielders. We obviously know their captain, Daniela Montoya, is there. It's going to be interesting to see which midfielders they roll out against Canada, but more interestingly, it's going to be it's gonna be interesting to see which goalkeeper they're gonna stick with, because here's the situation of the goalkeeper choices. So the two goalkeepers that have been called up for the 18-player roster have not actually played in 2024 at all. Catalina Pires is the number one usually for Colombia, but is coming back from an injury and hasn't played this year yet. She was their number one at the World Cup. She is Colombia's number one. And the two goalkeepers that have been rotating in her position so far have not been called into the final 18. And so quite the mystery of who they're going to stick with. I mean, assuming it's going to be Catalina Pires, but do you really bring in a goalkeeper that hasn't played a minute in 2024? She's coming off injury. Is there going to be any ring rust? What is that rust between the sticks gonna look like when it comes to penalties? And so it's gonna be interesting to see what midfield they choose, who's gonna be in attack and in goal. Again, if everybody's fit, I think you can kind of look at the consistency of the starting 11 that they've put out, but it has been injuries really surrounding this very, very exciting Colombian team. They lost against Ecuador 1-0 in their preparation game. I don't think it was I watched the game. It wasn't performance to really be worried about. Like, it doesn't really damper what they're building. I think it was quite clear that they wanted to rotate a little bit and also not go ridiculously hard where you're taking injured players. So Colombia is going to be a very exciting team. I think they have a really, really good chance of making that third playoff spot and improving forward and going over to the quarterfinals, which then the task becomes a little bit more difficult. But it's a debuting team. It's a very exciting team. I think it's a team that fans have really enjoyed. No Mayra Ramirez, Linda Caicedo. That's a really, really fun team to watch. Which brings me to the final nation in Group A, being New Zealand, a team who is making their 5th consecutive Olympics appearance. I mean, it's not necessarily too difficult for New Zealand to be making their mark in the Olympics. They're obviously the only team from Oceania that go into the Olympics. There's only one single spot for Oceania. They had to beat Solomon Island in their qualifications, which they did very, very comfortably by a result of 11-1. So I think that just tells you a little bit more about their qualification route. But unfortunately for New Zealand, there's been a lot of questions surrounding the team, particularly kind of the culture of the squad. Their head coach that has been with them since 2021, Jitka Klimkova, is stepping aside for this Paris Olympics. So she's still their head coach. She just won't be managing them and taking on her role this Olympics. So she decided to stand down from her role after the conclusion of an independent workplace employment investigation, which did clear her name and said that you can absolutely take the team to Paris. But in consultation with herself and the players and the federation, they thought it was best that she doesn't go on to the Olympics with them, as she feels like there's a little bit more to work on when it comes to the environment and her relationship with the players. Now, New Zealand football has been super tight and quiet about what the investigation was about. We did see kind of a leaked, I guess, letter from the players talking about how there's frustration when it came to the restorative process. So there's certainly a lot of friction between the head coach and the team. The head coach that has been with them for the last few years, took him to the World Cup. I mean, had some, quite a historical World Cup run last summer. But this does put a lot of questions around the team culture, around how is the locker room, and really the fact that they're going in with an assistant coach kind of taking over, but also the fact that this head coach is coming back after the Olympics. Looking at the roster, they have 10 new Olympians coming in, usually kind of actually the number that you see with New Zealand, even though they qualify pretty much every single Olympics cycle. I think what you will get to see with New Zealand is that they can play a very frustrating kind of mid to low block, and often when they concede during these mid to low blocks, it's because their own frustration or even their own errors. They have a really good balance between veterans and youngsters, but I think when you look at the quality of players that they have and the quality of the players that they're grouped with, it's just really difficult to see how a team like New Zealand can beat the likes of a France or a Canada or even a Colombia who's debuting. They had a pretty fun performance against Zambia and also a preparation game. They drew 1-1. They scored their goal off a penalty spot in the second half to equalize things. Had some pretty creative chances, were able to frustrate Zambia, which is not a sentence I thought I would be saying, New Zealand frustrating Zambia. But it was quite a fun game. I think you could tell watching it that both teams wanted to just be wary of the tackles that they were going into and didn't want to exert too much energy as both of them are headed to the Olympics. It's just really difficult to see how the football ferns go into this with good chances when they don't have their head coach behind them. There's been trouble in the locker room. You've got a lot of inexperienced players. 10 new players into an Olympic squad is quite a big number. And so for New Zealand, I don't know if they'll be able to make it out of this very, very tough group. What I do know, however, is that this Olympics is going to be one to watch. After what was a historic World Cup, this is going to be another historic Olympics. And honestly, when you look at the 12 teams and you look at the schedule that they have, I mean, let me remind you, it's 6 games in 16 days. That's an insane amount of games, and we can talk about load and I think the scheduling, which certainly doesn't help the ACL epidemic that we're in. It's a grueling schedule. It's 12 of the best teams in the world, and I actually think it's kind of exciting that we're not seeing the likes of Great Britain, Sweden, which is just crazy to think about. We're not seeing any Scandinavian representation, really, and we're not seeing, any of the English players. It does put this Olympics as a little bit more of like an unpredictable one. It's really hard to predict who's going to win this. Obviously, as a Canadian, I'm hoping Canada at least go on a podium. But this is a really, interesting Olympics, the way there's a lot of coaching changes. Not almost 6 out of the 12 teams from the World Cup don't have the same head coach. I mean, 7 if you include New Zealand as well. The Olympics is a different beast, and this, in my eyes, could be one of the most unpredictable Olympics that we have seen today. And so I'm very excited to see how things get rolling. I'm very excited to continue covering the Olympics. It's also going to be a grueling schedule on that end too. Let me know what your thoughts are on Group A, a very exciting group. Certainly not as chaotic, I think, and as crazy as the 2 other groups. And also make sure you check out those 2 other groups. I've had so much fun covering all 12 teams, digging a little bit deeper into their squads, into their players, into their kind of history in the competition. It has been a real thrill. It's also been absolutely fantastic to be able to bring on 3 very, very special guests, as well as Beth Priestman, who is the reigning head coach of the Olympic champions. Make sure you check out my chat with her as well. That for me is the Olympic Group Talk preview. Next time we chat, probably the Olympics have kicked off. So let me know your thoughts and everything that's been on the Olympics Group Talk. And to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.